Hello, students. This is the rubric I will use to give your myth a score. We talked about it briefly in class, but let's look at it in more detail. In class, we talked about the proficient column. We said that this is what we are aiming for, and this would be a grade of an A. We said the advanced column is extra credit. That is if you choose to go above and beyond proficient. We said approaching standard is almost to proficient. Remember, proficient just means you're meeting the standard. So if you're approaching the standard, you're not quite there yet, but you're close. And we said below standard is that you're writing below the expectations for this assignment or below the standard. We talked about these different categories. There's myth elements, there's plot, there's description / sensory details, there's dialogue, and there's use of language. So these are the different areas or categories on which you will be graded. Let me zoom in and let's go over these in more detail. So starting at proficient. To earn a proficient in myth elements, the myth clearly describes the first time a natural phenomenon happened. The myth uses third-person point of view consistently, and the myth takes place in the distant past. So these are the things you need to do to earn an A in this category. Looking over to advanced, here's what you would do to earn extra credit in this category. The myth clearly describes the first time a natural phenomenon happened using information from the article. So that's a little bit different. The myth uses third-person point of view consistently. The myth takes place in the distant past, and the myth teaches a lesson / moral. If we look over here at the approaching standard for the myth elements category, here's what you would do to score a B or a C. Remember, those are the grades for approaching standard in myth elements. The myth does not explain that this is the first time the natural phenomenon is happening. The myth uses third-person point of view inconsistently, so that means you're not always using third-person point of view in your writing. And the myth takes place in the distant past, but there are some items / things in the story that indicate an incorrect time period. That means you might have some things in your story that indicate your myth is not taking place in the distant past. So maybe some modern things like a car or a phone. That's the incorrect time period. And for below standard in myth elements, here's what you would do to earn a D or an F. The myth does not tell about a natural phenomenon. The myth does not use third person. And the myth takes place during current times or in the future. So that means that many items / things in the story indicate an incorrect time period. Remember, our correct time period is the distant past. Let's move on to plot, starting with proficient. The myth contains background information about characters and setting, and there is a central conflict which is adequately explained and resolved. So this means in your introduction, you have a lot of information about your characters and your setting. You also describe your conflict. You explain it adequately. That just means you're explaining it well, and you're resolving it at the end. To earn advanced in the plot category, the myth contains detailed background information about characters and setting. There is a central conflict which is fully explained and resolved. And for approaching standard, the myth contains minimal background information about characters and setting. The central conflict is somewhat explained and resolved. And for below standard, the myth contains no background information about characters or setting. The central conflict is not fully explained or resolved. Also contains the use of non-original characters. So if you're using existing characters from other stories, That will earn you a D or an F, or below standard, in the plot category. Moving on to description/sensory details, starting with proficient. The myth includes many sensory details to enhance the descriptions of characters and setting. Enhance means to make better, so you have a lot of sensory details. You're enhancing the descriptions of your characters and your setting. Remember, most of this should happen in your introduction. To score an advanced or some extra credit in this category, the myth includes many sensory details to enhance the descriptions of characters and setting, and the myth effectively uses figurative language. Simile, metaphor, and personification are the ones we talked about in class. To earn an approaching standard, a B or a C in this category, the myth includes minimal sensory details to describe characters or setting. And to earn a below standard, a D or an F, the myth is missing sensory details or uses details repetitively. That means you just have a couple details in there and you're using the same ones. You're not coming up with new sensory detail words. Okay, moving on to dialogue. To earn a proficient, an A in the dialogue category. The myth contains dialogue between characters that moves the plot forward. That means your dialogue serves a purpose in your plot. Sometimes students add dialogue that does not relate to what's going on in the story. And the second one, the myth always uses quotation marks to indicate dialogue. So wherever you have characters talking out loud, you're using your quotation marks. To earn extra credit or an advanced in the dialogue category, the myth moves the plot forward and demonstrates character traits with dialogue. So not only are you moving the plot forward with your dialogue, you're also using dialogue to demonstrate character traits to show off your character's personality. And the myth always uses quotation marks to indicate dialogue. To earn an approaching in the dialogue category, the myth contains dialogue between characters that is vague or irrelevant. Vague means unclear. Irrelevant means not related. Also, the myth uses quotation marks inconsistently to indicate dialogue. This means when you have dialogue, you are not always using quotation marks to show that it is dialogue. And to earn a below standard, a D or an F, the myth is missing or contains minimal dialogue. That just means not very much dialogue. And the myth does not use quotation marks to indicate dialogue. And our last category, use of language. To earn a proficient, an A in this category, here's what you need to do. The myth uses some transitions to move between ideas. Remember, transitions are those words like before, after, then, next, to move to the next idea. Also, the myth contains few errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation, or capitalization, and they do not detract from the meaning. So you can have a few errors and still score an A, but your errors cannot detract from the meaning of your sentences. To earn an above standard in use of language, the myth uses transitions skillfully to guide the reader. Also, the myth has few or no errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation, and capitalization. An approaching standard here would be, the myth includes few, if any, transitions. So if you only have a couple, or if you don't have any transitions, you're going to be in this area. Also, the myth contains mistakes in grammar, spelling, punctuation, and capitalization that detract from the meaning. So if your errors change the meaning of your sentences and make it hard for me to read, then that will be a B or a C in the use of language category. And to earn an F in this category, no transitions are included, and errors in grammar, spelling, punctuation, and capitalization interfere with the meaning. That means it's really hard for me to read your writing because the mistakes in spelling, punctuation, capitalization are changing the meaning and I cannot understand what you're saying.